what we're talking about is mostly the bindings that are associated with the media player. We're talking about the media player itself, and we're talking about how triggers are mostly useful for sending sysx, NRPNs, and RPN signals out to a hardware sense, but there are other uses, okay, and that are pretty clever. And there's some examples on the forum, and I will assemble a few of those examples and put them into the links on it when I post the video to the forum. Okay, when you are using the media player, it's important to realize that the sync for the tempo might be best driven by the media player itself, because often files will have tempo information burned into the file. Most DAWs burn tempo information into audio files, and of course there's tempo information in most MIDI files. So you would set it to sync to media player, not even though he's got sync to media clock showing, you would sync it to media player 1 or whatever media player you want to drive the tempo changes. But that's very, very handy, because now you got the tempo being controlled, and you'll never accidentally start up the thing and have the MIDI and the audio be out of sync. So you do want that. I just thought I'd mention that quickly because it's kind of a key point that often gets missed. But mostly what I wanted to show is some basics about just getting the media player in here, adding. So we'll go ahead. You add in one place to add. You can go up to Insert and Add Media Player from here. I take it you can see that, okay? And then once you have a media player, you right-click and go to the playlist editor, and you hit Add and add some songs that you're going to have in here. And they can be MIDI or WAV files or MP3s, etc. And once you get them in there, you then make it so the timeline down here is showing. So you click View and Timeline right here, just Control E. Now, Control E makes it appear. To make it disappear, you just simply drag it down until it goes away. And then Control E makes it come back, and it remembers the size it was at. All right, so I got mine pretty big here, so we could see some of the features, like these brackets here. You use the left and right bracket in conjunction with the cursor in order to set a range that you want to play, or loop. You can set it to loop. I have loop off here, but you can set it to loop a certain number of times or loop forever. Now, one other thing it's got is markers, and the letter M inserts a marker at wherever that is and asks you to give it a name. I recommend, if you're putting them close together, to use short names. But then it inserts a marker, and now clicking on these markers makes it jump to that position. Okay? You can give it a color, and like I said, clicking on it takes you to these different positions. All right. Now there's some stuff in here. You can create different play ranges and save the play ranges, load them in. That's mostly, I'm going to cover the markers though today, because that's something that a lot of people just might find useful. I already created a binding that would change the color of the absinthe to purple, okay? Just to show how a button press could do such a thing. And there it is right there, and that was playing with a trigger. It used a trigger, pointed at a specific trigger event, and that would be this trigger here, which on a specific trigger, meaning the 0, and there's 127, 128 possibles, 0 to 127, possible specific triggers. And you have to write this down because they're not named. They're just numbers. So you have to keep track of it in a spreadsheet or on a notepad. But this is sort of the roundabout way of changing a color, the way it used to have to be done. You had to have to get this button to send to a trigger, send to the trigger event, then have the trigger change absence color to number 9. All right? And so that's the way it was done. You don't have to do it that way anymore. Now you can change the color simply by changing its color. And here we have 2 examples of that, where button 29 changes the color of both the media player and the absinthe. Let's see what happens. Since I have it actually set kind of funny. I have it so a button press changes to 7 and a release changes back to 0. Same thing here. I have the button press change to color 14 and the release change to 0. And the result is when I press this button, they both go to black on release and they go to brown and yellow on press. Okay? And so now I'm doing it without any triggers. So you see, this is where in my research I found out, oh my gosh, everything I used to know about triggers is not necessarily needed anymore because we have a lot of the capabilities that used to require triggers now can be done directly through the bindings. Now, one thing I'd like to point out is that sometimes, like I have a controller and it set it up so I could have this range with 0 at the bottom and 14. I could have had this be red instead, for instance, number 1. And that would make it so that when I release, it changes to red. And there it does, okay? So it's black and then red. All right, that's all very well and good, but we were talking about the media player, not just buttons. Of course, let's start out with, we want play and stop to work. So if you have play and stop buttons, you can use the MIDI learn and set it up to send to the media player to play. And you can set it to a specific media player to play. So you can sync the media player to the transport and then start it by the spacebar. But sometimes that's not going to work out. Sometimes things will be sitting in pause in the media player, and you just want to start it again. Put it back into play. When you select a marker, it jumps into pause. I'll show you what I mean. There, when I clicked on the marker, you'll notice the pause button just came on. So if I press the spacebar, it jumps back to the beginning, because it's synced to the transport. If I'm in pause, because I clicked on a marker, what I'm going to want to have happen is that I just simply press play and it starts at that point. Now this is really useful for things where you have a bunch of, say you have a bunch of sound effects or something in one file, and you can have them all set up at markers. So that you can make a button that jumps to the next marker. Okay? So that's what I have here. I have this one goes to this marker, I press again, it goes to the next marker, I press again, it goes to the third marker. And then I have it reset. So that's a handy way of doing it, is the next marker type of an approach. Now I'm using a no edge button. Let me add a binding and use learn. You'll notice it sets it up as controller, and even though it's a single press button, it's sensing it as controller. So when I select my media player 1 and want to select a marker, and where is it, marker by number, it comes up as absolute. So that would be fine And it lets me, of course, because it's thinking it's a slider or a knob, you would set it up with the best thing. And apparently two's complement is very common with knobs. But that's not going to work very well for me, because if I'm needing to have the marker number 3 be selected by my button press. That's why you have to change this to a no edge button or a regular button, and it inserts a value there, but you simply change the value. And now you've changed the value to a regular hard value, and the button will work. But there's a little gotcha I just wanted you to be aware of. So now I've got that button jumping to marker 3 directly. So rather than using the next marker command, which I had originally, that's this button, and you can see the button firing up here, and it fires a bunch of, so it's all number 29. I have it changing the color of 2 things and going to next marker. Let's see it work. So we have that absinthe purple, media player black, press my button there and it goes to the next, press the specific marker, and it makes these have their own things go on. And I also have one that goes to the next song in the list. So just some and then play and stop. I could have a pause. I could have play toggle on and off, play and pause. Alrighty, let's get back into the binding. So I show you how I did all those things. So we just covered next marker, and that's this button here, which is making 2 color changes and jumping to the next marker. Marker by number, and these guys should all probably be together. So my marker by numbers, I've got these different buttons going to marker by numbers. This one, I just had left it in there to remind myself to tell people to have a button go to a specific thing. Get rid of the absolute. Then I have the play and stop. Now there's also play pause. Is, like I said, that's another good way to do that button, so that the play puts it into pause when you release, and then you push stop to actually get back to the beginning. Okay, and then next file is another one. I have a button number 31 here. It's this one. Switches me and loads in the next file that's in the playlist. So media player, I've got this one and this one. Okay, and they both have temporary ranges, meaning the left and right brackets have selected a range. Now this one I just simply selected the number, so it goes right to 2. Or I can do the next. There's a way of selecting the number that's by number or with number. Okay, so by number simply shows you a place to put in a value, and you enter a value. If you say marker with number, now it shows me the names of the current song, and lets you do that. Let me go ahead and load in that other song, and you'll see it more clearly. It's midway, C change, marker 3. Those are because they're named, and so the names appear, which to me seems a little handier than having to hard enter the number and kind of remember. So marker with number shows me my names that I've given the items. Marker by number simply asks for a number, and I enter the number. Golly, so that's it. That's all we had to cover. All right, anyway. Any questions yet? You'll note that this particular piece is very limited in how much it's playing. Now, one other thing I've added is that when I reach the end, I wanted something to happen. So let's go to number 3. Need to push play. Okay. Oh boy, I'm glad I hit you with that long chord, aren't you? All right, well, it's a little longer than I intended. All right, the reason I showed you this is because we used a binding that does a tricky little thing. When I reach the end of the song, by pushing play, you notice at the end of the song, these colors change. Absinthe and... There we go. They changed purple and that. So I could make this again. I went and made my original. This one's red, and this is black. And so I'm playing this few seconds, and red and black change. Bing, to purple and red. That was just as a demo to show that yes, something gets triggered, something happens, and it's really quite exciting. And the way that's done is on end of track range. At end of track or range. Okay? So in this case we used a range because I used the right bracket to set this range at the cursor. And set this end of track range to media player 1 and change its color. And just for fun and giggles, I made same signal to go via triggers to change the absinthe up here and change absinthe color to number 9. So, well, I certainly didn't need to. I also have it change the color when I hit play. And it's just to show that something happens. You can select on play and have something happen. So what happens when I hit play is that this media player turns green. Okay, at the moment. So it doesn't do anything very dramatical, but it does. The drama I'm hoping to convey is that, Lord of gosh, and this means that when I hit play on that media player, a host of other things can occur. Not just to the media player, but to anything that I select as a target in here, including looping back to get to external synths and other inputs, or to my engine, or to anything. Anything you can do with anything else that you can trigger. Just pushing play can start things going. It can turn on the recorder. Now, wouldn't that be handy? So you don't forget to turn on the darn recorder if you're trying to record. If you're not going to do the performance without that media player running their backing sets, you just push play and now it's going to turn on the recorder at the same time. Alrighty, now I'm open for a couple questions. Let's see. Anybody got anything? Have I mystified anybody beyond yet?
Looks like your trigger happy there.
No, I'm not using triggers. I only have one trigger. But remember, in the past, to do any of these things, it all had to be done with triggers. And so you would have these long lists of triggers. And the states were all they were all triggers too. But now that's all kind of built in behind the scenes. So the user interface for getting to this stuff has become a lot easier. You can select a synth and have whether it's resume suspend is enabled and have that be what fires off the trigger. But it doesn't have to fire off a trigger nowadays. Now it can simply perform the action that you want to have happen. Used to be you had to fire off the trigger, but something like that, and then have that trigger do it. So now I'd like to get into some experimentations. We've got this little save play range item here. First play range. And there it is, first play range. Okay, isn't that fascinating? Did you know that was in there? If you don't give it a name, it's simply called temporary play range. But once you save it, it has a range. Now it has a usable range. Now let's go ahead and set the transport up so that it's somewhere else. Use my left bracket, and that sets that there, and use the set my thing again to the end of that little portion, and use the right bracket on the keyboard, on the PC keyboard. And now I've got a new range, and notice it says temporary range. So that's very handy if you just need to set it up for right now. You want to play that fanfare at the beginning, at the end of the Firebird suite, because you're about to go into blue suede shoes. Yeah, that sounds viable. So again, that would be great for a temporary. You're only going to do it once in your whole life, but most likely you're going to do it more than once. So this would be second. And now you've got this showing up in here. Okay, so you get first play range, and with its markers, and a second play range, and you can have some markers in there. So to get a marker, remember, you simply put the thing where you want it, and you can zoom in, by the way, seriously, and you hit the M key, and it lets you give it a name. You go down here to the menu and say zoom to current position or zoom to play range, and if you do zoom to play range, it makes the whole play range fill the screen, or you can zoom to current position and simply gets you into that ballpark too. Okay, and gets you near where you are. Okay, but I find that zooming to the play range is super useful for when you're trying to place these markers and move them around and stuff. Now they're not movable by dragging, so what you would do is you would find the best position. You can move to current position, boink, and now it's moved, and you can delete them. So now that you've got these saved play ranges, and you can rename them and all that kind of good stuff, you got markers. Well, and it's curious they have set left marker. This brackets are actually setting left play range, right end of play range. So what can you do in bindings with that? Well, you can add a button. I'm starting to run out of buttons to play with here. Again, take it out of controller mode if it's a button and make it like a no edge or a button. Send it to your media player. And now you've got next play range, previous play range available to you. And you also can select the play range. And play next range, play previous range. So with a button press, rather than just selecting, you can, or jumping to the next one, and there, well, I'll show you. What happens is, push the right button, it goes there and sits and waits and pause. So you have to push the button to make it move. So you got first play range, and I push the right button. There it is in second play range. First, second. So notice though, it gets there, it gets to the place, but it doesn't start playing it. If I wanted it to actually just start playing right away, then I would go down here to play next range. And apparently it's going into pause, which I didn't expect. Well, that might be because I have that toggled. So with the ranges being settable, and you're able to turn loops on and off based on a range. So let's go to my second range, turn loop on, and have it loop twice. Push my magic button. So notice in my first play range, loop is off. Second, it's turned on. So isn't that lovely? So it remembers by play range whether you've got it looped. Okay? Now that's pretty useful for a lot of little things. For backing tracks, one thing I can think of, one use I can think of, is when you're at the end of a song and you've got some backing tracks and the audience is clamoring for you to keep going with that solo that you've been playing. Okay? Don't stop! You're the best! We love you! And, I eat that kind of stuff up. So I would push my magic button that takes me back to that play range that keeps the darn thing going. And already has it set up as a loop anyway. Or I can select a play range that's the same play range as before, but that one has a loop. So the old play range didn't loop. It just played through once and went on to the next range. So, and that's, again, where the end of range thing can be made to do something. So let's go ahead and select our media player. And you notice, by the way, I haven't even started getting into all the things that the media player can do with MIDI. We haven't even touched that. But basically, anything you can do, send from a controller and beyond, you can send from a MIDI file and execute commands galore as bindings, which is wild stuff. So at end of track or range, you have it do something. So in this case, we just changed the color, if you'll recall up here. End of track or range. But each one of these each one of your media players can have a different effect, can load in perhaps another range. So let's see. Media player, where are you? Oops, up here. And that's where you would say next play range or play next range. So now, at the end of the range 1, it is playing the next range. Or it can play the range it's indexed or on a scaled basis. That's interesting. Enter a sequence of values to be cycled through by separating each value with a character. So that would seem to indicate to me, because I haven't tried it yet, that when it reaches the end of the range, it can cycle through and jump to different portions of the file. So we're almost like getting granular with our playback, where it can jump to up here to some markers and back here and go to different play ranges that we have jumped all over the place and have it just jump around willy-nilly. But the neat thing is that we can do this at all. So then you have the next play range, previous select play range. Okay, so this is all stuff for you guys to play with, get frustrated with, and talk about in the forum with me later on. Okay, if I covered enough, if anybody's starting to hurt, don't forget, that's just play ranges, and the main use of a play range would be for having a loop. Because otherwise, a marker would be sufficient to just jump to a marker and just let it play on. But play range is going to play that section and then end. Well, the other use of a play range, of course, then is when it ends to trigger something else to happen. And it doesn't have to be play range being a media player at all. I could have massive change to another patch. Next preset. And have that controlled by the media player. The media player doesn't even have to have any actual audible content to make this all happen. There doesn't have to be anything but silence in that media player file. All you're using it for is for its timeline, so that you can set up events to happen at specific times. Now, very useful for me would be to have it send an electroshock into my butt to, stop me from soloing for a while. A certain amount of time passes. It means I've been soloing long enough. Now, this is an area where I could say end of track 1 change and create a whole bunch of things in a row that are making so that when this media player triggers, a whole series of things happen that aren't just, that aren't just a state change. Things that a state change wouldn't be sufficient for, like maybe sending a bunch of signals out to a hardware synth. It doesn't mean in state changes you can set it up so that by setting up states for each patch and sending those to bindings so that it sends out your synth when you change to that state inside of a hardware thing like I've done. If you have certain things that can only really be done via bindings that states won't cover, or that it would be more convenient in this case to just set it up inside of bindings so that everything's visible, then you could make this end of range, you could copy and paste it in and have it then affect your next item.
So I've something I'm going to use this for right away, and that is sometimes I do a scratch track in Reaper and like a guitar, acoustic guitar or something. Then I go over onto Cantabile on the electronic drum kit, and I loop it so I can record with it. And it'd be great to set it so that it just records and then ends record, so it saves the record and then loops again, so I can just try to get a decent take.
Yeah. One thing about using state changes, in this case where I'm using the media player to drive things, if I change states, it's going to reset my media player back to the beginning. So this would be a way to go outside of states to do things to my media player or to items where the media player stays in its track. You know what I'm saying? It stays in its timeline. But another thing that you could do, of course, is you could send song states and go to the set state, or you could load the next state, previous state, all triggered by being at the end of a range, and change a state. But let's go ahead and take a look at that and see if changing states resets my my player. I'll make a new state and see if it retains the info. Oh, looks like it does. It behaves. Isn't that nice? And let's see what happens if I change its position. I'll load in another play range. Okay, now I'm better. It's going to remember that. Control U. There we go. All right, so states also will load in your different play ranges. That's nice to know. I was afraid that it would lose my playback cursor position, but it doesn't. Unless I want it to. On load, I can have it go to a specific position based on a play range or a marker. So I could have it go to zip on load. I just need to go on to unload and create a binding. Zoop states. Onload. No milliseconds. And have it then go to my media player and go to a specific marker. Marker with number or by number? Do you remember which is which?
By number.
With number shows me the actual names.
Oh, okay.
So think of it as by number is just by number, like paint by numbers. A marker, you can just, use the word, the name of the darn thing, and it has a number with it, but it's just with a number. It's like, Harry is with Sally, Yeah. Yeah, that's the way I'm going to remember it. Right? All right, so now I can have this onload and go that way. Yeah, right? So I shouldn't have triggered that. Song state. Oh, I have to be specific. Select state index. Okay. Or state program. There we go. I hope. Let's see. Zoop. And now then I'd have to have the other state have something selected with that. So I guess fiddle around with that for an hour or two. Okay, well, that's the bulk of what I wanted to kind of show off today. Any questions about any of these menu items that I might not have
Actually,
covered?
I was wondering why the need for two options in the bindings, by number and with number, because with number you get both the number and the name. So it would seem that just with number would be enough.
Mm-hmm.
What's different?
I don't know. I guess if you know the number,
Maybe
marker by
that came
number.
first, in the
Yeah, it
programming.
might be.
Someone's using it. And
For
then someone said, it'd be
compatibility.
nice to see the name.
Also, you can reassign marker numbers. You can show marker numbers. And the fact that you can reassign them, maybe that's why. Maybe, you think? Perhaps?
Yeah, so it would go to whatever has the name that you selected, regardless of if you change the number. That would make sense.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
if it works that way.
if I move this one to its current position, now it's, I probably should move it further. Okay, it's now 4. So now it's in a different position, and when I do the reassign all marker numbers, now it's number 4. It's not number 3 anymore. And so that might be useful if I know that I'm always going to go to number 4. Let me take a look at the marker by number. And width. So now it knows. It did realize that this was number 4. Wasn't this always number 4? Yeah. And that might be a way just to make it be consistent that you have to put in a number. Not sure. Oh, look, I don't think it actually doesn't seem to work with selected states. Marker by number doesn't give me an option to change the number. So it might be an invalid binding. Whereas marker with number does let me do it. From a song state.
So maybe states memorize the name of the marker.
Yeah. Yeah, it could be. But that's a curious difference. All right, well, I'm going to rely on random questions for the rest of this next 15 minutes. I went a lot faster than I thought I would.
I have one question, which is, everything we've been doing here would be the same for MIDI?
Yes.
File?
Even beyond.
Okay.
Insane.
If it wasn't,
Insane. When you're talking media player, MIDI out. Now, it can be any specific channel, so you can have a multi-channel with 16 channels in that MIDI file that you've loaded in.
right.
You can select which of the channels it's going to pay attention to for this particular target. Whether it's a controller or anything else, pitch bend, etc., MMC, anything that you can throw into a MIDI file. Anything. It's just, that to me is nuts. And if it's a controller, what controller number, of course. And then send that to any target, including loopbacks, if you've got loopbacks enabled. And again, to just make sure people realize that to have loopbacks enabled, you go to miscellaneous and have show loopback ports checked for them to show up. Most people aren't going to need them, so that by default they are unchecked. So then they don't show up in the list. Okay. But yeah, it's insane. It means that you can program for a specific song, a specific group of events that you want to trigger other events. And those events in that MIDI file you can create a group and throw a whole bunch of these media player MIDI outs one after the next, having them all, every different event that's in there that you programmed, hit a different thing. And including turning on your recorder, which to me is the one I should use. What I should use is when I start Cantabile, the recorder's turned on. I forget to record the shows so often, it's sick. Oh, anyway, yeah. In fact, I think I'm going to, as soon as we're done, I'm going to go to jump in and figure out some various ways that my recorder will just start automatically, just based on the fact that I looked at it funny, with my jaw set funny, you know. All right. Yes, but that, to answer your question, the MIDI version, now you're talking where that's total deep dive. That is, I'm almost going to accuse people of true geekery if they even do that. Okay, true geekery.
I'll stand accused.
Yeah. And nonetheless, look at all that you can do just with these different play ranges, with just dealing with the timeline by itself. Ay. You know, the fact that the timeline can have markers on it, and that with no audio in there at all, the markers, and by the way, you can have markers on MIDI files too. But just with no content, just the fact that it's running. And by the way, there's two ways it can run. It can run in real time, and you can also set it to run in musical time, so it's bars and beats. So that way, when you change the tempo, it changes when the events happen. Okay.
Hey, I just have a comment about tempo change,
Mm-hmm.
which is I found out the hard way that they don't ramp. You know, you can only just set a different tempo each point. I'm actually going to ask them to ramp them.
They
Because
ramp?
I've used that.
They don't what?
Ramp.
They call it ramp in Mixbus. In Mixbus, I can say, okay, at this marker,
Oh,
it's 138, and then 10 bars over, it's gotten up to 140. And it'll just
All right.
slowly increase the tempo,
because
which
it's
is what
automation.
happens in songs.
It's automation.
Yeah.
In that program, it's automation. So if you want that to happen in this
Yep.
program, you have to write some automation. And the way to write that automation would be either to create a whole ton of triggers that are triggered by different times on the timeline,
Okay.
or create a MIDI file with a controller, any controller of your choice, ramping up in value, and send those values to the tempo controller slider.
Right.
And simply right click on this and create a binding to control it. So
Interesting.
I'll use a slider here, but in your MIDI file, you can record that metronome tempo. So instead, you can have this be a media player file. So there you go.
Terry, is meter also a possible target for besides tempo? Can you also change the meter in the bindings?
Let's
Yep.
see.
4 on
Music,
4 or
numerator,
7 on
denominator.
7, 8.
Time
something
signatures.
like that. Time
Oh,
signature, okay.
these are
Look up
the
above.
time signature presets and the denominator, numerator.
Yep.
Look at that action.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you can
do
just
Here Comes the Sun.
you can go from 3/4 to 3/8.
I would like to improvise in changing time signatures now and then. You know,
Yeah.
I'm a progger, so I need an odd meter now and then.
Well,
So,
that is totally amazing. That is really cool because, as we just pointed out, we could record a MIDI file that has a controller change and have that controller change adjust my tempo. Okay. So, same way, you could have a signal in that file that is set to a specific beat and bar and have it change the thing. And so it'll be predictable. You know exactly when that's going to happen as you're playing. And that would be reflected in your metronome, what you hear on your headphones, listening to your metronome as you're performing.
Yeah,
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I want to play with this.
Yeah. So yeah, the media player opens up these vast capabilities. I wanted to mostly touch on the initial things of what markers, end of range, the ability to jump to a marker from a button, and stuff like that. And because the minute you start diving into what the MIDI out can do, you know now you are in super control land because everything's possible. As we just pointed out, you can make that ramped tempo just by having a control change. So, and you could create the control change in your DAW.
Try out is I will try to program a button to change the loops or to jump to markers, because when I rehearse, I have a track with no keyboards, just and all the track from my band with just the other instruments and no keyboard. So I play over that. And sometimes I make mistakes and I want to get over the solo and do it again. And I used to do this by hand, just by stopping the media player, going back to the place in the track and so on. Now, thanks to your information, I could just put a marker or a range and control the loop. For instance, I could switch the loop on or something like that. Useful. So I don't have to stop rehearse to reach for the mouse and so on. I just have to hit a button and so on. Great.
One more question about the media player, which is I saw a discussion about like time stretching or whatever you want to call it. That's where like you lower the tempo, but the media stays in. Is that in action, or is that something Brad's going to work on? I remember seeing it discussed. I think it was going to involve him.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's there.
Oh, really?
Oh, it is there?
So you play an audio file back at a slower tempo and it plays back?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yep.
great.
At
Wow.
the same pitch. Yeah,
Right.
pitch state.
Yeah, yeah, it's pitch corrected. Yeah. Oh
right.
man, that is so cool.
In any case, you can create a binding to the speed knob on the media player.
Yeah.
So you can
Right.
control the speed
Hmm.
using a pedal or a fader.
Well, wouldn't you just change the metronome? You wouldn't do that to the media player itself, would you? Well,
For
I guess that
MIDI,
depends.
for MIDI
Yeah,
it
for
works,
MIDI.
but for audio it would not
Oh,
work.
I see.
Mhm. I use that when I rehearse to play at a slower tempo to be more precise, and then I speed up
Hmm.
when I learn the part.
Yeah, I do that also.
Not me. I doubled the speed because it's a challenge.
I'm sure you do.
Okay. Well, okay, let me stop the share. All right. Well, I hope this was exciting enough of a webinar to keep everybody hopping.
Yeah, got some things to try to do now.
Yep. I it's to me it's just like wow, it's like just such a universe of possibilities. Very exciting. Alrighty. And you can even program pre-program by in your DAW you can create those ramps, right, of a controller values going up and down. And have that move the sliders on the Hammond in and out while you're playing. Individual sliders, huh? Because Corky's here. This was in his honor. I brought that. He's never. No, he said, I don't do that. I'm not going there. Forget it. Purist.
Actually, all those little Hammond controllers, none of them are motorized. I don't think I ever
Yeah.
saw that.
On any of the. No, come on. They are all on. You have automation in all the.
No, they have. Yeah, I mean, you can get an X Touch or something, but the little Hammond style ones are all. They're all none. I never saw one motorized yet.
Oh, no. I was talking
Maybe
about a
they will.
VST instrument. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can
Best
always.
thing to do is pull them all out when you first start the song, and then adjust them, and then go from there.
Oh, yeah. Always
Right.
start with them all out. Of course.
Or all in.
Or all in if you're a real masochist. Yeah.
I'm telling you.
Why isn't anything happening? All right. I'll talk to you later.
All right.
All right. Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah. Good day or night.
Yep.
Hi, Earl.